الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي قصرت عن رؤيته أبصار الناظرين وعجزت عن نعته أوهام الواصفين الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين أبي القاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى وقوله الحق وهو أصدق القائلين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وابتغوا إليه الوسيلة وجاهدوا في سبيله لعلكم تفلحون صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات بيجي محمد وعلى السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Condolences in the bargah of Imam of our time, as well as Jami' al-Mu'mineen wal-Mu'minat, on the Shahadat of our sixth Imam, Rais Mazhab Jafari, Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. Indeed, it's an occasion which obviously there's some discrepancy as far as the date of the Shahadat is concerned. There have been multiple dates that have been mentioned in regards to the Shahadat of our sixth Imam, as has been the case for all the other Imams as well. But as far as this Imam is concerned, two prominent dates that are mentioned one is 15th of Shawwal and one is the 25th of Shawwal. Now obviously, as we always mention, regardless of what date it is, as long as we get to do the dhikr of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wassalam in our majalis, in our mahafil, that is the key for our success and the key for our salvation in this life and in the hereafter as well. For that particular reason, although I have only about half hour, maybe a little bit less than half hour, because Maghriban is around 7:45, try and summarize very briefly, as we always do every single year, in regards to our Masumeen, some teachings from them, some aqwal, as far as their lifestyle is concerned, and how we can adopt that and apply that into our daily lives. The verse that I recited, I'm sure you've heard it many times before, Surah Ma'idah, verse number 35, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing the mu'mineen by saying, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ittaqullah. O those who believe, fear Allah. And then he said, وَابْتَغُوا إِلَيْهِ الْوَسِيلَةِ, and seek a means to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever the means might be that could bring you close as possible to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, وَجَاهِدُوا فِي سَبِيلِهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, and strive in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that you may be muflihun, you may attain everlasting happiness. Every single person is after happiness. Naive is the person who's running after temporary happiness, and intelligent is the person who's running after everlasting happiness. And when we look at the ayat, throughout the ayat of Quran, we see that the formulas that have been mentioned shows the miracle of this book, that it is not kalam-e-bashar, rather it's the kalam of Khaliq. That in one sentence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the criteria and the formula to attain the everlasting happiness. Isn't it that you and I are always after everlasting happiness? This particular ayah and many other verses of Quran like this one, in one single ayat is telling us the formula and the criteria in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the everlasting happiness. Now obviously the sights of different individuals might differ, but what matters to us is what matters to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore he says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, very beautifully addressing those who have already brought iman onto Allah. He says, ittaqullah, first and foremost, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Safeguard yourselves against the evil. Wabtaghu ilayhi al-wasila, and seek a means to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is where we see that what does it mean to seek a wasila towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The concept of tawassul comes about. Concept of, seeking nearness. Every act of worship that we perform, what do we say? Qurbatan ilallah. So that we may be closer to Allah. So to seeking nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of these actions that we are performing, whether wajibat or mustahabbat, is in order to reach nearness of Allah, nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Somehow we can be close as possible, as far as our hearts are concerned, not the physical means of closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our spiritual closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is where we see that parents are wasila. Your children could be wasila. This salat that we perform is qurbatan ilallah, it is wasila. The hajj that we perform is qurbatan ilallah, is wasila. The fast of the month of Ramadan is a wasila. All the other acts which are wajibat are wasila. The dua that we perform on and off is a wasila towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, all of our good deeds are considered to be the wasila towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And foremost, the most important of these wasail and these resources is the wujud of ma'asumeen alayhim salatu wassalam, which is considered to be the wasila for every single person in humanity. Salawat biji Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now the point is, how do we consider ma'asumeen to be the wasila of this tawassul that we are trying to establish, and the implementation of the verse of Surah Ma'idah, verse number 35, which says, وَابْتَغُوا إِلَيْهِ الْوَسِيلَةِ. Aside from all of these wasail that we have, how do we consider ma'asumeen to be the wasila? Because the wujud of ma'asum, the naqsh and the wujud of ma'asum itself is considered to be the faiz of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's considered to be the abundance and graciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I will inshallah mention a few examples in this regards, that how, when the concept of faiz is concerned, that how you have electricity. We know these days, we give these examples, might not be appropriate to compare Allah and Masumeen, but just so that we can draw ourselves closer to Him. How there's always this hub of electricity, where the electricity is drawn or derived from, where the electricity is basically produced, and then how it is reaching in your houses. If you want to light up a bulb or a tube light of 100 watts or 60 watts, you cannot plug it directly to the hub. You cannot plug it directly where the mamba, the origination of this light is. Why? Because this bulb, this light, this whatever voltage it has, will not be able to bear the severity of it, and therefore you need some sort of mechanism in order to subsidize it so that it reaches these bulbs that we have in our houses and they are lit up. Otherwise, if you plug it directly to the hub, it will blow up. So therefore, this is a means, this means that you have in between, which is connecting you to the resources, the origination, connecting you to the hub. In other words, it is the same means, if you want to understand, that if Allah wanted, He could have sent down the Quran, He could have sent down the revelation and the hikmah towards the individuals directly, but He chose a wasila between us and Himself. Although He does not need any sort of wasila, He is not in need of a wasila, but still He chooses one so that you can communicate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through this Rasul that He has sent between you. And therefore, why you and I are avoiding this wasila when it is our turn to return this favor to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we can understand from this small example, and also how in Ziyarat-e-Jami'ah, it's a very beautiful ziyarah. Unfortunately, we don't get a chance to recite this very often because of the length of the ziyarah, but maybe we can divide it in different portions and recite it on and off. There's a sentence in the ziyarah. Obviously, the ziyarah is narrated by our 10th Imam, ﷺ, who says in the ziyarah, Bikum fatahallahu wa bikum yahtimu. What does it say? He's talking about Masumeen. He says, with you Allah has begun creation, and with you Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will seal the creation. That is to tell, this is Kalam-e Ma'asum in Ziyarat-e-Jami'ah, how he's saying that with the wujood of Ma'asumeen, the creation begins, and with the existence of Ma'asumeen, the creation survives, and there will not be a day until the creation will last that the wujood of the hujjat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remains on the face of the earth. So before Allah created anyone, there was the hujjat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the form of Hazrat Adam. And before the last individual leaves this face of the earth, there will be the hujjat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this face of the earth. And this is where we see how not just the Ma'asumeen, but also some of their companions had attained the status. And I'll mention in regards to one of the companions of our 10th Imam as well, Ali ibn Mahziyar, who remained in the city known as Ahwaz in Iran present day today. You know what Imam said about him? This is not in regards to Ma'asumeen. Imam said in regards to him that Allah will remove calamities because of your existence in that land. Imagine this. The status of this individual, Ali ibn Mahziyar, is a Sahabi, a companion, a narrator of hadith from a Ma'asum. What is a Ma'asum saying in regards to Ali ibn Mahziyar? He's saying, because of your wujood in Ahwaz, in that land, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has removed the calamities. You might say, well, you know, how is it possible? We see this is also the tradition in Quran as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks in the same way. If you refer to Surah Ankabut, verse number 32, when Allah had ordered the angels to go ahead and bring adhab to the land where Hazrat Lut was preaching, Allah ordered the angels, go ahead and send adhab. Carry out the adhab. However, Allah wants it to be carried out. He said, carry out the adhab. You know what the angels turned around and said to him? He said, قَالَ إِنَّ فِيهَا لُوطًا. Oh Allah, Hazrat Lut is among those people. You're telling us to send adhab on this nation? قَالَ إِنَّ فِيهَا لُوطًا. Hazrat Lut is present among those people. Allah replied by saying, قَالُوا نَحْنُ أَعْلَمُ بِمَنْ فِيهَا. We know who's among them. And we will tell them in ample amount of time to leave that land before you even go ahead and send your adhab onto them. So this is the tradition from Quran, that as long as the hujjat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is present in a particular land, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not send His adhab onto those people. Salawat biji Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We had a discussion in this past weekend in regards to some of the students of our 6th Imam. I want to very briefly mention in regards to one of the students of our 6th Imam. We talk about our 6th Imam, but when you talk about the students, this is where you can understand the exalted place of the teacher himself. So one of the students of Imam is by name Hisham ibn al-Hakam. Hisham is a very prominent student of Imam. In fact, Hisham is known as the mutakallim, theologian of his time. Obviously, Imam had trained different students, expert in different areas. Some were expert in fiqh, someone like Zurara was expert in fiqh. This person, Hisham, was expert in kalam, ilm kalam or theology. So Imam ﷺ, in fact, Hisham was brought up because he came in the custody of Imam when he was very young. He was still going through his youth years when he came in the presence of Imam, and basically Imam did a lot of his nourishing and tarbiyat as well. So we see that he has this extra attachment with Imam ﷺ. And so therefore, when he comes in, once Imam ﷺ was sitting in Mina, in his tent, he sees that Hisham comes in. As soon as Hisham walks into the tent where Imam was sitting with the other companions, right away Imam stood up, brought him and sat him right next to himself. Right away, there were a lot of akabir, there were a lot of big companions sitting over there looking at this, that Imam is giving such a status to a young man and bringing him, sitting him next to himself. This must be an extraordinary individual. So Imam was actually trying to show to the people as to these people are not ordinary people, and if you are not around, you refer to these people as far as your masail are concerned. So as soon as he brought him next to him, you saw that a lot of people were raising eyebrows. So Imam, in order to answer those people, he said one sentence. He says, هَذَا نَاصِرُنَا بِقَلْبِهِ وَلِسَانِهِ وَيَدِهِ. This person right here who's sitting next to us, he's our helper with his qalb, with his heart, with his tongue, and as well as with his hands. This is the status that Hisham has because of what he does. And obviously, this is where Imam asked him, "Oh Hisham, do you have enough knowledge to defend us against our enemies?" Hisham replied by saying, "Yes, O Imam, with all the teaching that you have provided to me, I do have the capability to defend against the enemies." This is where Imam made a dua. He said, "Nafa'aka Allahu bihi wa thabbataka." May Allah keep you steadfast on this path and to benefit, and so that you may benefit from it. Hisham said, after Imam made such a dua for me, I never looked down, or I never lost any of the debates that I had after that point. This was the ta'athir of the dua that Imam had made for me in my regards. So we see one debate that Hisham had, because he was a mutakallim, he would go around debating. One debate that Hisham had, I want to mention it in front of you. Hisham, again, he walks into the tent. Imam says to Hisham, "Hisham, mention or tell us about how was your experience with a person by the name Amr ibn Ubayd al-Mu'tazili." Amr ibn Ubayd al-Mu'tazili was an alim in Basra, and he was sitting in the masjid of Basra when Hisham was also there. He asked Hisham, "Explain to us as to how was your experience when you debated him." Hisham was feeling shy at the moment, because he's sitting in the gathering where Imam Masoom is there. He says, "Oh Imam, it'll be audacity to speak in front of you." Imam orders him to tell, so that I want others to hear as well. It was a reason that Imam was asking him to do such a thing. Then he starts mentioning, he said, "Well, this person Amr, he was in the Masjid of Basra sitting with his students, and they were discussing the concept of imamat. And not that they were discussing the concept of imamat, they were actually denouncing the concept of imamat, saying there's no value of imam and there's no need of an imam." And this really was disheartening to me. So I went to the mahfil. I walked into the masjid. I made myself close. I asked people to let me be close to this alim so that I may ask him a few questions. He said, "Fine." He comes close, and this is where he says, "Oh, knowledgeable man." This is how Hisham addresses. If you want to get someone's attention, you praise him. Obviously, he was a knowledgeable man anyway, but Hisham praised him, so he got the attention right away. He said, "Oh, knowledgeable man." Right away he says, "What do you want?" "Oh, my son." Obviously, Hisham was very young, and this person is very old. He said, "I want to ask a few questions. I'm a stranger over here, and I want to ask a few questions from you. Hopefully you can answer them." He said, "Yeah, ask me whatever you want to, and I will answer your questions." Hisham said, "I'm going to ask very simple, basic questions, so don't get annoyed." He said, "Don't worry about it. Any question you want to ask, go ahead and ask." The first question that he asks is, "Do you have eyes?" Right away, this person, now keep in mind, Hisham is trying to make a point over here. They were discussing imamat, and they were denouncing imamat, saying there's no value of imamat in Islam. There's no need of imamat in Islam. So he asked him, "Do you have eyes?" Right away, he seemed annoyed. He said, "What are you talking about?" "Yes, I have eyes." "What kind of question is that?" He said, "Well, I told you my questions will be very, very basic. So bear with me and answer those questions." He said, "Yeah, no matter how stupid your questions are, I'll answer them." He said, "Yes, I have eyes." He said, "What do you use your eyes for?" He said, "I use my eyes to obviously navigate and see things that are in the surrounding, to differentiate between different colors and recognize different people." He said, "Very well. Do you have a nose?" He said, "Yes, I do." "What do you do with your nose?" He said, "I use this nose to smell different things. It tells me good or bad smell. It's able to distinguish through this nose." He said, "Do you have a tongue?" He said, "Yes, I do." He knew what the next question would be. So he answered right away saying, "Yes, I have this tongue and I use it to taste different things and to say and speak and communicate with people." He said, "Do you have ears?" He said, "Yes, I have ears." And he explained right away that I use these ears to do what? To hear different things. After having established this platform, Hisham asked him, "Do you have a heart?" He said, "Yes, I have a heart." Now obviously these four senses that he asked him were visible. So if you see these things, eyes, ears, nose, and tongue, still you wouldn't ask. But heart, I can't see. At least physically, I can't see. But if I know if a person is alive, I know that they have a heart. They cannot be living and walking around without a heart. That too, obviously, we're talking about a physical heart and not the spiritual heart. There are a lot of people walking around without the spirit in their hearts. But nonetheless, he said, "Yes, I do have a heart." He said, "What do you use this heart for? What do you need this heart for?" He said, "Heart is the center for all the senses. Whenever one of my senses is in doubt or skeptical about something, for example, if the taste of something is uncertain, or the sound of something is uncertain, or something, a color is uncertain, this heart clarifies those doubts for my senses. He said, even if you have all of your eyes, ears, tongue, and nose sound and salim, do you really need the heart? It seems like heart is irrelevant, because all it's doing is supervising all of these four other senses that you have. He said, no, my son. Although I have a nose and an ear and an eye and the tongue which is sound, but I still is in need of the heart, because a lot of time these sound organs also tend to make mistake and fall astray and be misled, and therefore this heart comes into play to go ahead and guide him into the right path. This is where Hisham made the punchline. He said, how is it possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not leave these 4 or 5 senses of yours without a governing body inside, without this governing heart, which sort of supervises over all of your senses? Then how is it possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will leave the whole ummah after Prophet had departed without anyone who can watch over their actions and bring them out of any sort of doubt that they might have? Salawat Beji Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. See, he was able to prove to this alim kabir as to the concept of imamat. Don't take it for granted. Imamat is a necessary part of your life. Imam and the wujud of imam, not that imam is dead is any good, no. Wujud of imam, as long as you're alive, is imminent and it's necessary. And how is it that you deny the fact that so we see that even with the wujud of Ma'asumeen, we are living in the ghaibat of a Ma'asum. But when Imam was present in front of people, there were people who were denying the Imams, let alone in the time that we are living right now. So here we see there are other things that also prove this point, that why do we need? A lot of people today ask this question, even among our own, because the concept of taqleed and ijtihad actually was derived from our 6th Imam's teachings, where 6th Imam was sending these students to different places, and they were sort of acting like marja taqleed for the people. They weren't referring directly to Imam, as there have been a lot of instances in ahadith where many of these students of Imams are directly giving fatwa without referring to Imam, because Imam has complete trust in them. In fact, there's a hadith where the person comes to, an Arabi comes to Imam and he wants to debate Imam. But Imam designates each and every single one of his students. Whenever he says, I want to speak to you in regards to fiqh, he says, speak with Zurara. He says, I want to speak to you. He said, no, if you can beat Zurara, that means you have beaten me. This is the trust that Imam has as far as his students is concerned, because he himself has trained. So a lot of people today also question the concept of taqleed. Not the outsiders. I'm talking about people within our own. Questioning, what do we need taqleed for? Has not Allah given you this aql? So you turn around and ask these individuals, have you ever regretted in your life? If a person is very, very honest and modest, say, yeah, I might have regretted a few times in my life. But if you ask a person like me, in the short life that I had thus far, I can say maybe 1,000 times I have regretted some of the decisions that I have taken. It hasn't been a long time, but it's still, I can say maybe 1,000 regrets in my life already. Oh, I should have done that. I should have done that. I shouldn't have done that. Whenever you regret doing something, that means what? That means your aql failed you. Why do you regret? You regret because you did something that you shouldn't have done. So because of this regret, it reminds you this aql can also fail you at different places. I'll give you another example. As far as choosing a spouse is concerned, intikhab hamsar. Why do you see divorces in the community today? Because they failed to make the right decision. If they had made the right decision, they would not be divorcing. No man would divorce their wife, or no wife would want to be separated from the husband if their aql was complete. Because when their aql is complete, they would make the right decision. The fact that we have divorces in the society, unfortunately, is telling us that their aql, there are a lot of regrets. So our aql leads us fool sometime. It does not live up to the expectation and fails us sometime. So the concept that, there's so many divorces, and the concept that there's so many lapses in our lives is due to the fact that our aql sometime fails us. When we have this regret, when we have this failure as far as our aql is concerned, we see that the same individual at the time of marriage or before the time of marriage are saying, I love you and whatnot to one another and showing their expression of love and whatnot. Now they can't even bear to live with one another. That means they must have made a mistake. There must have been a lapse, and so on and so forth. So this aql cannot be 100% as far as the failure is concerned. It could come about. So there are regrets in every single individual's life. And therefore, when it comes to ulum deen, you could have regrets as well. And that is the reason you cannot say because you have aql, you do not need this ilm, or you do not need the taqleed. And the concept of taqleed comes into play, that you cannot assume a lot of things through your aql. I was to ask you, tell me through your aql, what did Alexander the Great do? No, it's a matter of history. It has nothing to do with aql. You got to study the history to be able to tell me what Alexander did. Your aql, based on your aql, having aql kamil, you will not be able to tell me. Just to make the story short, this is the concept where you cannot say, because Allah has given me aql, now I do not need these maraji, I do not need these scholars' help, I can figure out Islam by myself. This is something which is not allowed. And therefore we see that sa'i sadr, or broad chest, or having this broad-mindedness from the ma'asumeen was something which was eminent. We see that on many occasions ma'asumeen, how they showed and their makarim al-akhlaq, even though a person had insulted Imam in their face. Having this, sharh sadr, or having this broad chest to be able to absorb all the insults that people were throwing in front of Imam. Forget about the masumeen. I'll give you an example of non-masum. There was an alim by the name of Sayyid Abul Hasan Isfahani. He was a marja of his time. He would always carry a bag of letters with him. He was a marja taqleed. Imagine being a lone marja of his time. Today we have, alhamdulillah, 7 or 8 maraja alive. But there was time, back in the 80s, back in the 70s, there was only one marja. Because he was the alam, no one else had the ability to even come out and speak as the marja taqleed. The time of Ayatollah Khuy, the time of Ayatollah Hakim, the time of Ayatollah Brojardi, and if you go back further, there's only one marja of the time. Sayyid Abul Hasan Isfahani is the same way. In his time, he's carrying a bag. A person asked him, what do you have in this bag? He said, I have in this bag letters from, people of my ummat, insulting letters, where they have really insulted me. They have gone out and said things that it's not even worth reading. Person said, let me read one. He said, oh, I couldn't even read it. Type of insults that were in there. So what do you do with these letters? He said, I have forgiven all of those individuals. The same way Hazrat Yusuf, when he saw his brothers, what did he say? He said, La tathriba alaykumul yawm. There's nothing upon you today. I have forgiven you completely. This is how the scholars are, let alone sharh sadr and sa'i sadr from Ma'asumin alayhi salatu wa salam. Salawat biji Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I have maybe like a minute or two left. Wanted to discuss 25, and I don't know why I brought 25 of them. 25 things that Imam mentions where the words of the hadith begins with وَطَلَبْتُ, that I asked Allah for this and I got this. He said, for example, I'll share a few. He said, وَطَلَبْتُ السُّرْعَةُ فِي الدُّخُولِ إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ. I asked for the quickness to get into the paradise. And he says, فَوَجَدْتُهَا فِي الْعَمَلِ لِلَّهِ تَعَالَى. And I found it in performing act for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, فَوَطَلَبْتُ حُبَّ الْمَوْتِ. I asked for love of the death and maut. فَوَجَدْتُهُ فِي تَقْدِيمِ الْمَالِ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. And I found it in spending my money in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Each one of them require, what is the connection that Imam is trying to establish? He said, وَطَلَبْتُ رِقَّةَ الْقَلْبِ. I asked for the riqqat, the shaking of the heart, that my heart is also shivering and shaking with the kalam of Allah. فَوَجَدْتُهَا فِي الْجَوْعِ وَالْعَطَشِ. But I found it in being hungry for performing the fast. I found riqqat qalb. When we are fasting and then you recite a dua, you will see the riqqat that comes upon you, as opposed to when you recite it in other means. I'll recite one or two more. He said, وَطَلَبْتُ نُورَ الْقَلْبِ فَوَجَدْتُهُ فِي تَفَكُّرِ وَالْبُكَاءِ. I asked for the illumination of my heart, نُورُ الْقَلْبِ فَوَجَدْتُهُ فِي تَفَكُّرِ وَالْبُكَاءِ. And I found it in contemplation and weeping for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam goes on and on, saying, وَطَلَبْتُ this, وَطَلَبْتُ this, وَطَلَبْتُ فَضْلُ الْجِهَادِ. I asked for the best, what is the virtue of jihad, because I've never attained that virtue. I've never been part of a jihad. He said, فَوَجَدْتُهُ فِي الْكَسْبِ لِلْعَيَالِ. And I found it when I was earning halal money for my family members. This is how Imam gives example in regards to وَطَلَبْتُ فَوَجَدْتُ وَطَلَبْتُ فَوَجَدْتُ. And Imam goes on and on. There are 25 those instances. Inshallah, I'll have more time at another place, another time, to go through all of those 25 instances. Just very quickly, that this Imam who lived to be 65 years, the longest that any other Imam ever lived. یقیناً اس امام نے سب سے زیادہ طول عمر پائی از لحاظ عمر کہ کسی اور امام نے اتنی زندگی نہیں پائی، کسی اور امام کی مدت امامت اتنی نہیں تھی. لیکن اس کے باوجود آپ دیکھیے، یہی وہ وقت تھا کہ حکومت وقت کے لیے امام کس قدر مشکل ہو گئے تھے کہ امام کا وجود حکومت وقت کو برداشت نہ تھا. اسی لیے منصور دوانقی نے اور جو دوسرے خلفاء آئے امام کے زمانے میں اور دوسرے حکماء آئے امام کے زمانے میں، کوشش یہی تھی کہ امام کو شکنجے میں رکھا جائے، امام کو زندہ میں رکھا جائے. لیکن پھر بھی امام کو چھوڑنے پہ مجبور ہو جاتے تھے. کئی سفر کیے امام نے، امام کوفہ گئے ہیں کئی مرتبہ، بغداد گئے ہیں کئی مرتبہ، لیکن پلٹا دیا جاتا تھا امام کو مدینے کی جانب. بس وہ وقت آیا کہ امام کو زہر دیا گیا، امام نے زہر کو نوش کیا، امام نے جام شہادت نوش کیا اور امام کی روح اس دنیا سے پرواز کر گئی. لیکن وہ وقت آخری وقت ہے کہ جب حمید خاتون کہتی ہیں، ابو بصیر جب آئے ہیں میرے پاس، آ کے پوچھا ہے کہ امام نے آخری وقت میں امام کی کیا حالت تھی، تو کہا اے ابو بصیر، کاش تم اس وقت ہوتے کہ جب امام کی نزع کا وقت تھا. امام نے اس وقت ایک عجیب و غریب فقرہ کہا. امام نے اپنے بچوں کو سامنے لے کے آئے، اپنے گھر والوں کو سب کو بلایا، تمام فرزندان کو بلا کر امام نے ایک عجیب و غریب وصیت کی. امام کہتے ہیں، لا ینال شفاعتنا من استخف بالصلاۃ. ہماری شفاعت اس شخص تک نہ پہنچے گی جس نے نماز کو سبک لیا، جس نے نماز کو آسان سمجھا. بس امام نے یہ آخری وصیت کی ہے، آپ اس کو جوڑیے اس وصیت سے کہ جو امام حسین کر رہے ہیں. جب امام جا رہے ہیں مقتل کی جانب، امام نے جناب زینب سے کیا وصیت کی، اے بہن لا تنسینی فی الصلاۃ اللیل، اے میری بہن مجھ کو اپنی نماز شب میں فراموش نہ کرنا. ادھر چھڑے امام بھی نماز کی توضیح کر کے جا رہے ہیں. الا لعنۃ اللہ القوم الظالمین وسیعلم الذین ظلموا ای منقلب ینقلبون. بار اللہ ہماری سے بات قبول فرما، ہم گناہ گار ہیں، ہمارے گناہوں سے درگزر فرما. ہمیں اہل بیت علیہ الصلوۃ والسلام کے نقش قدم چلنے کی توفیق عطا فرما. ہمیں ان کی تعلیمات پر عمل کرنے کی توفیق عطا فرما. ہمارے امام کے ظہور میں تعجیل فرما. ہمیں ان کے اعوان و انصار میں شمار کر. ربنا تقبل منا انک انت السمیع العلیم.